Good morning, all, and welcome to the Public Service Commission. We are here and continuing the hearing in the matter of the application of Dominion Energy South Carolina for adjustment to increase retail electric rates, schedules, tariffs, and terms and conditions. This is docket number 2024-34E. I apologize for being a couple minutes late, but we've been discussing a couple of preliminary matters. One is, it's my understanding that Mr. Elliott will have to leave here by 5:15. So that will be an absolute, I guess, cutoff date today. And Mr. Burgess, you had another issue. Somebody wanted to be excused.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. Counsel for CMC Steel contacted me last night, and Mr. Shishis is on the line. They have a request of you that they'd like to make.
All right. Well,
good morning. Good morning. We don't oppose the settlement, as was discussed earlier, and we have also agreed not to cross-examine any witnesses of Dominion. We would like to be excused with the understanding that should the commission require anything of us, you simply have to ask, and we'll come right back to the hearing.
that's your choice, but certainly we will get in touch if something does come up. But thank you for letting us know.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. First, of course, will be roll call of commissioners. Everyone's here in the hearing room. And unless there's anything else, Mr. Burgess, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, sir. Mr. Ziegler is going to present the next panel for the company.
Mr. Chairman, Dominion would call to the witness stand Keller Kassam and Sean Randall.
All right. I'm going to ask the court reporter to re-swear you since it's a new day.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Yes, ma'am.
These questions will be for you, Mr. Kassam. I'll let you get your papers straight there. Please state your name for the record.
Keller Kassam.
Are you the same Keller Kassam who testified in this hearing yesterday?
Yes, sir.
Did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 22 pages of direct testimony that was pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
I did.
Do you have any changes or additions to that testimony?
I do. There are two corrections. If you go to page 13 of that direct testimony, line 18, it's a typo. Remove the period. And then if you go to page 17, line 8, remove the word and, A-N-D. That concludes those changes.
Thank you, sir. With those changes, if I ask you all the questions contained in your pre-filed testimony today, would your answers from the stand be the same?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would move Mr. Kassam's pre-filed direct testimony into the record as if given orally from the stand.
I'm sorry. The refiled direct testimony of Keller Kassam will be submitted into evidence as if given from the stand.
And I believe there are no exhibits to your testimony. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, sir.
Would you please present this summary at this time to the commission and the parties?
Good morning, Chairman Powers and fellow commissioners. It's good to be back here again. The purpose of my direct testimony is to provide an overview of the application in this proceeding and explain why Dominion Energy South Carolina is seeking rate relief at this time. The leadership at Dominion Energy South Carolina is focused on giving our employees the tools and motivation they need to serve customers safely, efficiently, and reliably. DESC's service territory is in a period of phenomenal demand growth. DESC must meet growing demands while at the same time it expands, upgrades, and replaces aging electrical infrastructure, meets increasingly stringent environmental regulations, and reliably incorporates more than 1 gigawatt of new solar into the operations of the system. To meet these challenges, Dominion Energy South Carolina must provide its employees with safe and efficient generation plants, whether new or upgraded, that meet current customer demands and environmental standards, along with a resilient and expanded transmission and distribution grid that is growing to meet the growing electrical needs of the state, while new technologies are implemented and outdated and vulnerable structures and equipment are being replaced. As discussed in my testimony, since the last rate proceeding, the company has spent a total of $1.6 million in capital to support safe, reliable, it should be $1.6 billion, in capital to support safe, reliable, and economic electric service. This rate proceeding is about establishing rates that will allow DESC's investors to recover past investment in the system and continue to provide the capital needed to provide safe, reliable, and efficient generating assets going forward. The returns that the Commission allows in this proceeding, and by this I mean the actual earned returns, will determine whether investors will be willing to provide capital to support the ongoing investment in electrical infrastructure that the state will require to support growth and maintain safety, reliability, and environmental compliance. In my direct testimony, I discuss how the financial issues in this case impact 4 major groups of employees. Our generation personnel work around the clock in plants that are largely open to the environment, where conditions can be bitterly cold or extremely hot, and sometimes can be both in a different area of the plant on the same day. These personnel work dangerous jobs around high-pressure steam lines, spinning turbine generations, high-voltage machinery, and switchgear. There's little or no room for error. They staff plants 24/7 and are subject to emergency call-out and extended hours due to weather conditions and emergency events, so that customers have the energy they need. For them to be able to do their jobs safely and effectively, Dominion Energy South Carolina must be able to replace generating equipment that is outdated or inadequate, make safety and environmental improvements at the plants, build new plants to meet the growing needs of customers, and invest in the kinds of dispatchable generation needed to integrate intermittent solar resources onto our system reliably. Many of our plants date to the 1970s. The $1.6 billion Dominion Energy South Carolina has invested in its electrical system since the last rate case, $478 million was for upgrades, improvements, and additional environmental controls for generation plants. The other major element of the electrical system is the transmission and distribution grid that delivers power to DESC's 793,000 customers. DESC's electric grid consists of over 26,000 miles of distribution lines that directly serve commercial and residential customers, and 3,700 miles of increasingly modern, resilient, and reliable transmission lines. Our transmission system controllers and transmission planners work behind our walls of cyber and physical security to ensure the reliable, safe, and efficient functioning of the grid. They are trained to understand and anticipate how Dominion Energy South Carolina's loads evolve season by season and hour by hour, and how its generation and transmission system responds under a wide range of conditions. They plan for future system reliability as loads grow and new resources are added to the system. They ensure that the system can respond instantaneously to emerging issues, including unplanned load spikes, loss of intermittent solar generation, and transmission and generation outages. For them to do their jobs, they require sufficient, reliable, dispatchable generation that has the operational flexibility to meet the needs of the system as those needs evolve, hour by hour. They need a robust transmission system that has the capacity to serve changing loads reliably and has multiple pathways so controllers can reroute power to customers when storms and plant or line outages cause disruption in power flows. Downstream of system control, distribution and transmission line workers and other personnel operate, maintain, and support the electric transmission and distribution systems. Many of these men and women work on the lines themselves. These are dangerous and physically demanding jobs, and they must work on the ground and over heat at all times of day and fully exposed to the elements and all weather conditions. just like last night. These personnel are on the front line restoring services when storms cross our system, and we often call on them to leave their own families at home in the dark to ensure that other customers' power is restored. Their jobs require an on-call way of life 24/7. These people are the moving force behind safety and customer service. The tools that Dominion Energy South Carolina's transmission and distribution employees need to do their jobs include a modern, robust, and well-maintained transmission and distribution system with the resiliency needed to handle storms and extreme weather. Such a system requires effective and disciplined vegetation management and the replacement of outdated poles, lines, and equipment before they fail and cause outages or injury to crews working around them. Of the $1.6 billion that Dominion Energy South Carolina has invested since the last rate proceeding, $963 million went to creating such a system through the expansion, replacement, and improvements of its electric transmission and distribution assets. Continuing to invest in the grid is a necessity. And there are tangible benefits to what Dominion Energy South Carolina is investing in the grid. Earlier this year, the South Carolina Department of Commerce announced that a new manufacturing project would bring over 3,500 jobs to the Midlands. It is no accident that in a multi-state competition, the owner chose a site that will take service from modern, highly reliable, and resilient transmission lines that DESC recently completed and that this commission recognized in rates in its last order. The benefits from the investment also include Dominion Energy South Carolina's remarkable accomplishments in reducing customer outages, as measured by its System Average Interruption Duration Index score, and in protecting the safety of its workers, as shown in company witnesses Randall's testimony. In addition, DESC now has approximately 1 gigawatt of intermittent, non-dispatchable generating resources connected to its system in the form of large-scale solar facilities, and more are planned. The output of these facilities must be managed with dispatchable fossil units providing real-time response to the ups and downs of solar generation. This creates operating challenges and additional need for investment. In response to these challenges, DESC has implemented new technology to decrease response time to solar intermittency, utilize pump storage, and peaking modernization to accommodate the volatility of solar, and constructed new transmission and distribution lines to keep up with solar growth. In response to the growth of solar, Dominion Energy South Carolina has embarked on a peaking modernization program to replace aged peaking generation at Bushy Park, Parr, and Urquhart. These quick start facilities provide operational flexibility and fast response capabilities to pair with solar's intermittent, non-dispatchable nature, and coupled with the combined cycle natural gas units at Jasper and Columbia Energy Center, allow Dominion Energy South Carolina to balance its generation mix in a variety of changing conditions. Finally, South Carolina is facing a dynamic energy future. South Carolina is now one of the fastest growing states in America. Dominion Energy South Carolina is collaborating with numerous stakeholders to address the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. In other dockets, Dominion Energy South Carolina is proposing to expand its demand-side management efforts to provide customers with additional incentives to manage energy consumption across peak and non-peak periods, and in this case, is proposing expanded time of use rates using DESC's newly implemented AMI meters. A new capacity will be needed, especially to serve the Charleston area, as well as other parts of the Lowcountry. DESC is partnering with Santee Cooper to explore building a shared combined cycle natural gas generating unit at the former Kennedy's generating site, home to 3 fossil units. DESC can utilize this facility to retire or reduce its reliance on the remaining coal assets on its system while providing fast response dispatchable generation to pair with solar. The project can also serve as an anchor natural gas load to support expanding pipeline capacity into South Carolina. Turning to the application, the rate request before the Commission is based upon a 12-month historical test year ending 30 September 2023 and seeks a net increase in rates to allow DESC the opportunity to earn a return on equity of 10.6%. DESC's actual return on equity during the test year was 4.32%, or 55% below its return on equity allowed in 2020 of 9.5%. The current return is unreasonably low by any standard and cannot support continued investment in the system at the level that South Carolina needs. To achieve the requested 10.6 ROE, Dominion Energy South Carolina is requesting approximately $291 million net in additional revenue, net of DSM adjustments. If all the company's proposed 2024 rate changes are approved as requested, including this general rate case, annual fuel, demand-side management, and pension rate adjustments, then as compared to currently approved rates, the resulting net increase for the average monthly bill for a residential customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours per month would be of 3.58%, or $5.24, effective in September of 2024. The key drivers of this request, as stated above, include unprecedented system growth and investment. Since 2020, Dominion Energy South Carolina has added over 40,000 new electric customers and $1.6 billion in new investment. Growth in both customers and investment is not expected to abate in the near future. This includes manufacturing and data centers. Actual returns are not sufficient to attract and deploy capital to meet the dynamic growth and resulting electric demand within South Carolina safely, reliably, and with resilience. Dominion Energy South Carolina respectfully requests that the Commission approve the application. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Sam. Let me, with the chair's permission, let me grab one document from my associate.
Make yourself at home.
These questions are for Mr. Randall. Mr. Randall, please state your name for the record.
Sean Randall,
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Dominion Energy, South Carolina. I'm the Vice President of Transportation.
Excuse me. Microphone. Thank you.
My apologies. Want to start over?
Certainly. Please state your name for the record.
Sean Randall,
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Dominion Energy, South Carolina. I'm the Vice President of Transmission and Delivery.
Did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 65 pages of direct testimony that was pre-filed with the Commission in this proceeding?
Yes, sir, I did.
Do you have any changes or additions to that testimony?
I do not.
If I were to ask you the questions contained in your pre-filed testimony today, would your answers from the stand be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would move the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Randall into the record of this proceeding as if given orally from the stand.
Earlier, we talked about corrected direct of Mr. Kissam. Are you putting in the corrected direct or?
Oh, the corrected
both?
direct, yes, of Mr.
All right.
Randall.
Just wanted to get that. And Mr. Randall as well,
Correct.
corrected direct.
He has pre-filed his corrected direct, so that was what I was referring to.
Pre-file corrected direct testimony of Mr. Randall will be submitted in evidence as if given from the stand. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Randall, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, sir, I have.
Would you please present that summary to the Commission at this time?
Good morning, Chair Powers and members of the Commission. My testimony reviews the company's operating results, focusing on safety, reliability, resiliency, and customer service. I give examples of the investments we have made in the system, and I make 4 specific requests of the Commission related to accrual mechanisms for storm damage, vegetation management, the environmental reserve, and the major maintenance and nuclear outage accrual. As to safety, the utility business is inherently dangerous, and employee safety is always our first priority. But beyond that, a safety culture is also a culture of care and professionalism, where employees take responsibility for how their actions affect others, learn to think through consequences before acting, and adhere to well-thought-out processes and procedures. The company's accident frequency ratio has been below the Southeast average for some time and nationally in the top quartile, as you can see displayed on the graph on the chart now, Chart A. The top line shows the Southeast electric exchange average compared to DESC average below. During the 2015 to 2023 time period, the company experienced 55% fewer accidents on average compared to its Southeast utility peers, We're very proud of that achievement. The top demand of our customers is reliability. SAIDI, or the System Average Interruption Duration Index, is the benchmark for measuring reliability. SAIDI is often measured on a 5-year basis to smooth out annual variations. From 2019 to 2023, DESC had an average SAIDI of 82.66 minutes, as you can see displayed on the chart on the screen now. In 2022, DESC's SAIDI of 78.4 minutes reached a historically low level. As reported by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, DESC's reliability in 2022 was 40% better than other investor-owned utilities here in the state of South Carolina. Our low SAIDI score reflects our structured cyclical vegetation management program. Our service territory has one of the most intense growth rates in the United States, driven by a high precipitation rate and one of the longest growing seasons in the continental U.S., based upon first to last frost. Effectively managing vegetation requires constant investment and a disciplined approach. Effective vegetation management coupled with a robust system for identifying and replacing equipment in the field that is in danger of failing has allowed us to achieve this exceptional reliability. DESC has supplemented these efforts with the deployment of supervisory control and data acquisition, or SCADA switches, and advanced metering infrastructure to allow us to monitor and control our system remotely. The resiliency of DESC electric system is measured through the ability to withstand and recover quickly from major weather events. Since 2020, DESC has responded to 1 major hurricane, 4 tropical storms, 5 winter storms, and 1 tornado. In all cases, restoration was accomplished in either 1 or 2 days of the end of the storm. And you can see that history displayed there on table 1. This level of resilience has been achieved through proper vegetation management, design standards incorporating updated industry practices and technology, and dedicated employees working around the clock until the last customer has been restored. I should note that storm response is a joint effort with ORS. When a storm hits, DESC looks to ORS to play a critical role of ensuring that accurate information is communicated to the state's leadership and to the public, and to coordinate DESC's effort with the South Carolina Emergency Management Division, the executive branch of South Carolina government, and with customers across our service territory. ORS is a valued partner in our storm response efforts. As Mr. Kassam stated, since our last rate proceeding, the company has invested a total of $1.6 billion in assets needed to provide safe, reliable, and economical electric service to electric customers. And you see a breakdown of that investment by major capital buckets there on the screen now. Our generating assets are performing very well. In 2023, the company's fossil units had a forced outage rate of 0.41, excluding water unit number 1, which was offline for extended repairs. This compares to the 5-year industry average of 5.99, as you can see displayed on the screen now. This performance is particularly outstanding considering that much of the company's fossil fleet is more than 50 years old. DESC's single unit nuclear facility has also achieved exemplary operations and availability during the test period. The major maintenance accrual mechanism has been extremely effective in allowing DESC to plan and execute major turbo generator maintenance outages on maintenance intervals as prescribed by the original equipment manufacturers. This helps to ensure the long-term availability and reliability, and it helps DESC minimize the overall cost for generating power on behalf of its customers. In this proceeding, the company is requesting authorization to expand the major maintenance accrual mechanism to cover a Fairfield pump storage facility, which is increasingly important in balancing the company's system and integrating the 1 gigawatts of intermittent solar that has been added to the system. This is a different mission than the one that the unit was originally built to fulfill. During the test period, DESC implemented advanced gas path upgrades on combustion turbines in the Jasper and Columbia Energy facilities. These upgrades will add 100 megawatts of additional capacity to the system while reducing fuel cost and extended the maintenance period between outages. DESC also completed heat tracing at the Columbia Energy Center to increase reliability in times of extreme weather. The addition of 1 gigawatt of solar generation to DESC system has also increased reliance on peaking units used to deal with solar intermittency. As the Commission is aware from docket 2021-93, the company has undertaken a program to retire and replace several of its older end-of-life combustion turbine peaking units. The replacement units will provide fast starting and responsive generating capacity to respond to solar intermittency and capacity to maintain DESC's planning reserve margins. The photograph displayed on the screen now is a picture of Bushy Park unit as it was being constructed back in February of this year. In sum, DESC's power generation operations during the test period achieved continuous improvement in areas of reliability, safety performance, and efficiency. DESC has made and continues to make targeted investments to promote improvement in each of these areas with clearly demonstrable results. Concerning transmission, my testimony provides multiple examples of important projects recently completed to improve the capacity and resiliency of DESC's transmission system. Mandatory NERC planning standards require that DESC model its transmission system annually to show that it can withstand foreseeable system contingencies while continuing to serve customers. In compliance with these standards, DESC has modeled power flows in the greater Aiken area and found that the Aiken area transmission lines were not adequate to handle the increased power flows due to the growth in solar energy facilities in the area and the addition of Vogel Units 3 and 4. Worst case loading occurred on sunny days when mild weather and when local energy consumption was low and solar output was at its maximum. In response, the company constructed over 28 miles of new 230 kV transmission line and 70 miles of rebuilt and new 115 kV transmission lines to move this non-emitting power through the grid and provide a more reliable and resilient path for power flows between Aiken and the greater Columbia area. DESC also monitors the age of the system and takes into consideration age-related risks when determining its construction priorities. For example, during the period, DESC rebuilt the Cain-Hoy to Mount Pleasant No. 1 and No. 2 lines crossing Horbell Creek in Mount Pleasant. These lines had been constructed in 1969 and 1978, respectively, on wooden structures that cross wide areas of creeks and marshes. They are essential to power flows into the Mount Pleasant and Greater Charleston area. DESC required the contractor to provide engineered matting design for working in the marsh to ensure that marsh grasses could fully recover after construction. DESC also hired independent environmental engineering groups to survey the conditions of the marsh before, during, and after construction. Construction took over 8 months, and the project was successfully completed in January of 2022. Here on the screen, you can see a before picture of the Horbell Creek crossing, then a during construction with the matting installed to allow them to put in the new steel structures, and then after, showing the new steel structures and the grass starting to grow back or reestablish itself. DESC also rebuilt the BC Summer 1 to Denny Terrace and BC Summer 1 to Pineland lines, which carry output from the nuclear station onto the grid. These were 1972 era lines that experienced recent cross-arm and structure failures. They have been replaced with highly resilient, self-supporting galvanized steel poles. Here in Figure 5, you can see the old structure on the left and the new galvanized self-supporting structures on the right. DESC did the same with the Blackville West to Wagner line, which was having frequent failures of the conductor due to age and damage, which was impacting customer service in the Wagner, Sally, Perry, Springfield, and Blackville areas. Here in Figure 6 on the screen, you can see the old structure on your left and the new self-supporting structure on the right. These are just a sample of projects undertaken since the last rate proceeding and more discussed in my testimony. DESC has added over 40,000 electric customer accounts since the close of 2019, an increase of approximately 5.3%. Since the last test year, DESC installed approximately 19,172 new or replacement distribution transformers and approximately 1,593 miles of new or replacement distribution lines. Before accounting for depreciation and other offsets, DESC has invested $637 million in the expansion and improvement of the distribution system. Additionally, the company is continuously monitoring, evaluating, and deploying technological enhancements to improve the performance of the electric distribution and transmission systems. These investments take place through the deployment of SCADA devices and AMI metering. Concerning customer service, DESC continues to improve our customers' experience and reduce the effort that customers must expend to interact with us. We offer a mobile app, which has over 550,000 downloads, a new suite of online digital tools to understand energy usage, online street light outage reporting, a mobile app for builders to interface with the company from the field, and web pages that allow customers to make requests related to danger tree removal or vegetation management requests. Customers now have multiple self-service options to report outages and check outage status via the mobile app, websites, voice response systems, and text. As of December 2023, approximately 85% of customers' reported power outages were made through self-service channels. We provide chat lines through automatic notifications to customers who search for our toll-free number on Apple or Android devices. Between 2019 and 2023, call center call volume decreased 31%, a reduction of over 515,000 calls, despite significant growth in the number of customers we serve. This shows that many customers can now find the information they need or obtain the service they require using our web-based tools. In 2023, over 91% of our post-call survey participants rated their phone interaction with the company as positively impacting their experience. The company remains committed to serving customers with limited income, customers living with disabilities, older adults, veterans, and those medically dependent on electricity. In 2022 and 2023, our company employees participated in over 450 community outreach events and partnership meetings, reaching more than 150,000 households. The company makes Web Pledge available to agency partners. This is an online application to facilitate online pledge voucher payments to assist DESC customers. Web Pledge allows customer assistance funds to flow from agencies to customer accounts, quickly resolving payment issues. In 2023, the company connected customers with more than $23 million in energy assistance from multiple agencies. Since the introduction of Energy Share in South Carolina in 2020, Dominion Energy Incorporated has made corporate contributions totaling $19 million in funding to assist residential customers and qualifying small general service customers. And now we offer prepay programs that allow customers to pay as they go for power, eliminating the need for customer deposits across the system. That concludes the summary of my report on the operations of the company during the test period and the investments at issue in this case. My direct testimony also discusses 4 accrual accounts. Concerning vegetation management, the company proposes to increase the annual accrual from $27.7 million to $33.2 million, an increase of $5.5 million to reflect the current cost of vegetation management based on current contractor bids. This amount also includes, for the first time, the cost of light detection and ranging, or LiDAR, and tree removal as part of cyclical right-of-way maintenance. Both are important components of a proper vegetation management plan, and the use of LiDAR to detect where vegetation growth is encroaching on our transmission conductors is now an industry standard practice and ensures compliance with NERC reliability standards. The vegetation management accrual continues to provide a predictable basis for funding a multi-year vegetation management program allowing for the efficient planning and staffing of these activities. We request the Commission to adjust the accrual as requested. The company also asked to resume collecting storm damage reserve. The annual amount proposed to be collected reflects the annual average storm damage expense over the past 10 years above the $2.5 million level, which is $8 million. The company is also proposing to recover the current balance of costs in the former storm damage reserve over a 5-year amortization period. The terms of the storm damage reserve would otherwise remain as established by order number 1996-15, as updated in subsequent orders with a cap collection amount of $100 million. We are also proposing to adjust the annual turbine maintenance expense accrual to reflect a 10-year planning cycle, and as discussed earlier, add the maintenance of the Fairfield pump storage turbines, reflecting the growing importance of this critical energy storage facility. The company has adjusted the accrual based on the current costs from our vendors. Finally, in replacing the PAR CT units with modern state-of-the-art natural gas-fired aeroderivative CTs, DESC has identified environmental remediation costs at the site in operation, at the site of the operation of the long-retired PAR steam plant that operated from around 1924 to 1993. Remediation of the PAR site is a necessary part of DESC's plan to locate a modern, reliable combustion turbine at this site, which among other things will play a critical role in providing off-site power to VC Summer Station in the event of a major grid disruption. DESC proposes to increase the expense associated with the current environmental remediation accrual to recover this amount over 5 years. In conclusion, I ask the Commission to recognize the value that DESC provides to its electric customers and the hard work and diligence that thousands of employees have put into creating the operating results discussed here. I ask the Commission to approve the rate relief requested to allow us to fund the continued investment in the safe, reliable, and increasingly clean electric service to our customers. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Randall. Let me direct my questions to Mr. Kassam. Mr. Kassam, have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your direction 33 pages of rebuttal testimony that was pre-filed with the Commission in this proceeding?
I have.
Do you have any changes or additions to that testimony?
No, sir, do not.
If I were to ask you all the questions contained in that pre-filed testimony today, would your answers from the stand be the same?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would move the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Kassam into the record of this proceeding as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Kassam will be submitted into evidence as if given from the stand.
Mr. Kassam, are there any exhibits to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
No, sir.
Might I suggest that there are two?
You might.
Thank you, sir.
Been a long 2 days.
WKKK1 and WKK2. Do you have any changes or corrections to these exhibits?
No, sir.
Mr. Chair, at this time, I would move those two exhibits into the record.
The two exhibits of Mr. Kassam will be put in the record as exhibit number 11 and received into evidence.
Mr. Kassam, have you prepared a summary of your rebuttal testimony?
Yes, sir.
Would you present that summary at this time to the Commission and the parties?
Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, the purpose of my rebuttal testimony is to respond to intervener testimony regarding material and supply inventory, coal supply, generating plant retirements, environmental remediation accrual, programs for interns and education assistance for our employees, and adjustments to director and officer insurance, trade associations, and research and development costs. Additionally, my rebuttal testimony emphasizes the importance of the economic development expenses to the state of South Carolina and highlights our outstanding reliability metrics. Dominion Energy South Carolina maintains its material and supplies inventory for one overarching purpose: to ensure that line workers and plant operators have what they need to support the timely restoration or extension of service to customers and to ensure that our generating plants are available when needed. Some items like transformers and breakers are routinely on back order for as much as 3 years or require extremely long manufacturing times, and the time from order to delivery can be 6 months to 4 years. Asking customers or plant operators to wait that long for equipment needed to support reliable service is not reasonable. As a result, we stock items that may be critically necessary, even if they may stay in inventory for 4 years or more. Also, keep in mind that over 2,000 megawatts of our current generating capacity is over 50 years old. Spare parts or replacement components for older equipment are very hard to obtain. Keeping spares in inventory, in some cases for decades, makes common sense. Likewise, having the right material in inventory is critical to timely storm restoration. DESC stocks spare transformers and other long lead time equipment to respond to emergencies like hurricanes or other storms. These storms do not occur in predictable 4-year cycles, but reserves of these spares need to be on hand to begin storm restoration work when the storm is past. While customers are waiting for their lights to come on, they do not want to hear that we don't stock the parts and equipment needed to restore their service. Ultimately, these transformers are like your spare tire. Better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. DESC operates an inventory control system that involves inventory management and storeroom personnel continuously reviewing inventory, focusing on inventory stock items that have not shown recent movement. After consultation with operating personnel, they remove from inventory any items that are obsolete or not likely to be needed in the future. The system involves the physical inspection of every inventory item at least every 2 years, as FERC requires. It also fully complies with DESC's inventory management requirements under generally accepted accounting principles in Sarbanes-Oxley, and includes special provisions for evaluating inventory at the close of capital projects to determine if the removal, replacement, or reconfiguration of equipment makes existing inventory obsolete. And as a result of this control system, Dominion Energy South Carolina Electric Operations identified and removed $500,000 of obsolete or unneeded inventory during the test year. ORS witness Bickley assumes that the only or best way to monitor inventory is to record the acquisition date of every item, like a born-on date, and write off inventory that is more than 4 years or 2 years and 9 months old. This is not accurate. In my testimony, I give multiple examples of inventory items that are more than 4 years old that are critical for DESC to keep on hand. This includes supplies set aside in special packaging and storage to allow for rapid storm restoration, a 160-foot tall steel transmission pole required for rapid restoration of major transmission lines crossing the intercoastal waterway and marshes in case of failure, but would take months to requisition. Parts like transmission bushings, like we needed down in Columbia with the outage we had downtown with the pigeon coming in on the breaker. Specialty capacitors and pump impellers that would prevent long outages of nuclear and fossil generating stations if their counterparts in operation failed. These older inventory items are not obsolete or unneeded, and DESC's inventory management system reviews all inventory items on a regular cycle to ensure the removal of any that are. When a company migrated its asset management system to the system used by Dominion Energy, Inc., operating companies, the company specifically migrated all of the data that the company needed to administer its inventory management system, which is comprehensive, effective, and fully consistent with FERC obligations and the needs of an electric utility compared to retail or other enterprises. The Commission should reject the suggestion that this system is defective or inadequate, or that there's a basis for an $87 million write-off of inventory, as ORS suggests. In regard to the appropriate coal supply, the company's coal plants are critical reliability assets that only provide reliability if they have coal to burn. Disruptions in coal supplies and rail transportation have put reliability at risk in the past, and there will be disruptions in the future. The 45-day standard is one that the company has chosen as properly balancing the inventory cost against reliability risks based on its operating experience, in addition to market forces at play. The data shows that the company is working to sustain the level of inventory after the effects of COVID, supply chain disruptions, the new demands caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and financial hardships that affect the operating of coal mines. Penalizing the company financially for its efforts to maintain a reasonable coal supply going forward is not only short-sighted, but it puts reliability at risk. As it relates to generating plant retirements, it is not reasonable to exclude from rate base the early retirement costs associated with the peaker units at Hardyville, Bushy Park, and Parr. The investment that remains in these plant accounts is investment that was made at a time when those units were necessary to support reliable service to customers, and it also recovers the decommissioning costs related to support their replacement with more modern, reliable, and operationally flexible units, as noted in Mr. Randall's testimony. As a result, these costs are reasonable and prudent. Denying rate-based treatment for these amounts means that investors will not receive a return on monies that they invested in prudent assets used to serve customers. In response to ORS's proposal to close the environmental remediation account, the environmental remediation accrual was created by the Commission in Order Number 2012-951 and has been functioning as intended for approximately 12 years. It is similar to the environmental remediation accrual account for natural gas operations, which have been successfully used for decades to defray the cost of remediating manufactured gas plant sites, including the recent cleanup of tar deposits in the Congaree River in Columbia, South Carolina, which has been a very public success, acclaimed by the governor and others as an example of the efficiency of public and private cooperation to improve the environment. Going forward, the company is currently evaluating the closure of existing coal units, the development of new generation assets, perhaps on brownfield sites, and the demolition of the Urquhart fossil steam units. Grid expansion and modernization is likely to involve redevelopment and expansion of existing substation sites. It is not unforeseeable that additional environmental remediation costs will arise in that process, and that is exactly what the remediation account is designed to manage fairly and efficiently. Next, I discuss the importance of our interns and educational assistants, as well as performance, spot, service, and retirement awards. The proposal to disallow the cost of internships and educational assistance seems very short-sighted. DESC's most valuable resource is its people. Our internship program is how we attract some of the best leaders in engineering and other technical talent. Many interns go on to have long and productive careers at the company. I was the beneficiary of an internship program 36 years ago. Our education assistant program encourages employees to continue their education while they work with us. It is a valuable part of the benefits package we offer, and there's great value when existing employees can advance in positions requiring higher credentials while bringing the knowledge, experience, and relationships that they have developed at the company with them. With dedicated, well-trained employees and leaders, the company can operate a safe, efficient, reliable, and affordable electric utility and create a culture of excellence. Without them, you cannot. Spot service and retirement awards are items of modest value that are given in recognition of extraordinary actions by employees or to recognize service to the company over many years. They're an effective and valuable way to express gratitude to DESC's most valuable resource, its employees, and the awards' value to morale and continued commitment far exceed their limited cost. In regards to D&O insurance, trade associations, and R&D costs, D&O insurance is not a bonus or a perk, but a universally recognized cost of doing business. You cannot attract board members without D&O insurance to protect them personally from claims and the cost of lawyers to defend claims, and you cannot operate a utility without a board. The benefits associated with the company's membership in professional industry associations are numerous, but difficult to quantify. The company's membership in professional industrial associations help to embrace operational excellence, advance for the electric utility industry, address common concerns, and promote the efficient use of electricity. Additionally, professional and industry associations advance the electric utility industry by connecting people, ideas, and information. I discussed yesterday how our membership in the Southeastern Electric Exchange is how we get mutual assistance crews here, and certainly how our crews are now working at CenterPoint Energy today. Finally, my rebuttal testimony addresses a proposal to remove economic development cost and our electric system's outstanding reliability numbers. Given the fierce competition between neighboring states and countries for new industrial facilities, a strong economic development program is essential. Dominion Energy South Carolina representatives coordinate with state and local government economic development officials to carry out marketing missions, industrial recruitment, and other development activities. These combined efforts contribute to the growth of commodities in our service area and the betterment of the overall industrial base of the state. ORS recommends denying recovery of economic development costs where the effort is not successful. It's impossible to know which efforts will be successful until siting decisions are made and publicly announced. DESC cannot afford to wait until a siting decision is made to offer its support to the South Carolina Economic Development Team. To make a meaningful impact in the recruitment effort, Dominion Energy South Carolina must pursue reasonably likely prospects, despite the fact that they will not be successful in all cases. In regards to the company reliability metrics, which the CA witness Rothschild disputes, the southeastern area prone to violent thunderstorms, as we saw last night, ice storms, tornadoes, and hurricanes, and our long growing season makes vegetation management a continuous challenge. Despite these challenges, DESC's SADI, System Average Interruption Duration Index, is in the top quartile of regional utilities, as demonstrated by Mr. Randall's attachment exhibit, and is far and away the best in South Carolina, as the figures I present show. Likewise, the speed with which the company is able to restore service after major storms is remarkable and reflects the investment Dominion Energy South Carolina has made in transmission and distribution infrastructure and its disciplined approach to vegetation management. As evidenced by my testimony, I'm very proud of what the company and our family of employees in South Carolina have achieved. Not only their operational results, but their outreach into the communities that we serve. This concludes the summary of my rebuttal testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Sam. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Sam and Mr. Randall are available for questions from the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. Any commissioner questions? Commissioner Caston?
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Running a utility's tough, isn't it?
At times.
Most times.
Yes, sir. It's 24/7, that's for sure.
Some days are easier than others.
Last night was rough.
Woke me up too.
Yes, sir.
And I didn't get a call. So that's always a good thing. I don't have to worry about that anymore. Just out of curiosity, and I look back through the direct, and I think it was yours, Mr. Randall, that figure one. We had, I think that was a photo of the CT or one of the new, I can't remember what you call it, Aerodyne or whatever.
Yes, new Bushy Park combustion turbine.
What size was that?
It's 55 megawatts. And the ones that we're constructing at PAR to follow, there'll be two of those units, 110 megawatts. And at ERCOT, we're in the middle of a request for proposal on competitive bids for what will determine the final output of that one, which we estimate would be 200 megawatts.
And just for my edification, how many acres does that take up?
I'll give you an example. Columbia Energy, 640 megawatts of that efficient gas unit that we pair with renewables. That's right there in the neck of Calhoun County, right outside of Richland County. You can see it. You can certainly see it now with all the trees they cleared off of I-26. It sits right over there next to DAC. It sits on about 31 acres. And in addition to that, we have that Bushy Park. It sits right down there off to the side of A.M. Williams, and it sits on about 4 acres. And that doesn't count the substation, which is right outside. And so that's one of the things that I'm glad you brought that up, Commissioner Caston, because one of the things that I do when I take people on tours for their edification is I take them to a coal plant that spreads out about 300 acres. Then I take them to a gas plant to show how efficient and compact it is. And then I carry them to a solar farm to show them how the thousands of acres that it sits on. And then I talk to them about the different energy sources and the availability. That a coal plant, it takes 3 days to ramp up. Gas plant, it takes up a few hours to ramp up. And solar, it depends on, what the Lord sends us in the way of sunshine.
Well, I had totally different questions, but let me ask this. And I've observed you've mentioned solar and dispatchable and 1 gigawatt and such as that more than once. Relative to cost and I guess ultimately rates, has the increase in solar generation, has it helped hold down cost?
We're obligated for the large solar farms to take whatever output they have, and we purchase it at avoided cost. Now, as Mr. Randall talked about, it has strained some of our existing units that track it. Let's take Fairfield Pump Storage and why he asked about the accrual for Fairfield. Fairfield was built back in the early 80s when VC Summer was constructed. And what was supposed to happen with it, and what did happen, is at night, when the load was less, it would take the output of VC Summer and it would run large pumps, these big pumps. Now, you and I could go out there and get, when I say the pipes that we pump out the Parr Reservoir up into Monticello, you and I could go get in my pickup truck and we could drive up those pipes. That's how big they are. And so that's how that plant ran. Well, now with solar, here's what happens. During Winter Storm Elliott, when we really needed power, solar didn't produce anything. And I was praying for it to please come on, but it didn't produce anything till about 9:45 a.m. and we'd already hit our peak. And so we were running the pumps at Fairfield. So instead of them running at night, they run in the morning when solar isn't available. We flow water out of Monticello down into Parr, and they spin. And that's the best battery we got on our system, okay, the best. It's a water battery, but that's how it works, like a battery. Then when solar comes on, because this just tells you the benefits of solar, and solar is a good generation resource. So then when solar comes on, sometimes we have excess solar that exceeds what our loads are. Like I said, it's an intermittent resource. You can't dispatch it, you can't control it. So what we do then is we take that excess solar and we divert it to those big pumps that we have. And then they use that energy to pump that water up that hill into that Monticello Reservoir. Then in the evening, it's going to be hot as heck when you're going home. You're going to start seeing now at about 4:30, 4:45, that solar line is just going to start coming down like this. And then what will they do? They'll start flowing water again to spin the turbines in order to be able to, serve our load. So you see, just using that example of that unit, there's a lot of wear and tear on that unit. When you put a lot of wear and tear on that unit, with that surging and that sucking that goes on every day, twice a day, and then one great thing is amazing. I wish I could show you the pie chart when we had the solar eclipse. You remember when we had it? Mm-hmm. We were sitting there rocking along, running those pumps, and I mean, it's like somebody came in and cut them a nice little slice out of that pie. And I mean, it went to nothing. Zero. All right, it was pumping out at about 600 megawatts, solar was, and it went to zero like that. Why? Because we had a solar eclipse. And then immediately, it shot back up. So what were we doing? We were scrambling around in system control. They were scrambling around to go in and take the pumps offline, get ready to flow. And then sure enough, here it came back again as the eclipse passed, and it went back to pumping again to use up that energy, that intermittent energy that was on the system that we didn't need. So it's great. It's a great energy source. I mean, it comes from the sun. Sunlight's free. It's like the breeze. But the problem is you got to pair it with something else based upon its intermittent nature. So it does make it complicated. And all of the solar projects that you see on our system, the majority of them are over from Beaufort to Saluda. They're on the western side of our system, if I were to show you the map. Why? Land's cheap over there. So you can build them out over there, and people are willing to develop it and do it. You're not going to go in there around Charleston and buy up land for a solar farm, much less around Columbia, so it's all over there. So think of that. They're all out there as a generating source, but they aren't even close to our load centers of Charleston and Columbia. So you got to get it there. And it's like Mr. Randall talked about in his testimony. We had to go in and build various transmission lines in order to be able to accommodate that movement of energy on our system.
Now, is this because these are QFs, or and the utility doesn't dictate where they go, or?
No, sir, we don't own any solar. We hadn't spent any capital on solar. Now, our parent company, Dominion Energy, they have some solar projects that are in our system, so I want to be clear on that. That is not us. They put those here and started putting those here before we were even acquired by them. So they have some solar projects here with their merchant solar. There's none owned. They're all under purchase power agreements where we take their we have to take what they generate, and we pay them at our avoided costs for that generation. So we don't own them. And we do not dispatch them.
Okay, when I think in terms of cost and rates and all this stuff, but I guess to dig a little deeper, I'd probably save that for maybe IRP, because now you've just got all kind of things going up here, all kind of questions I want to ask, but.
Commissioner,
Yes, sir.
could I ask one question while we're
Absolutely.
I've seen all over the country where parking lots are solar. You've got massive parking lots with your different places, and it would be right where the power needs to be dispatched. Has any consideration been given to turning a parking lot into a solar farm rather than good agricultural land?
Oh, yes, sir. We have several customers that have taken advantage of that and have interconnected into our system. In addition to that, our new fleet facility we built over here on 12th Street, it was built to a certain environmental certification, and it has solar panels attached to it. And new crew quarters that we look at where you park the trucks, consideration is given to putting solar panels on top of it. You have to look at the loading requirements that come with it, because when you start putting solar panels on top of a truck shed, you got to build a more robust truck shed. So I will tell you, Mr. Chairman, that is something that we look at and give consideration to. And I've seen it in a lot of airports too. So I think it's something that's going to catch in to utilize that space, because, being from a very agrarian rural county in the state, everybody was fine, but with solar coming in, but now you're starting to look at land use and taking ag, how people going to eat, how people going to get clothed with cotton and peanuts and soybeans and corn. So that's something that, and even row crops, vegetable crops. And so that's something I think you make an outstanding point, and something that needs to be considered in that regard. And I can tell you it is something that is going into the design of facilities as our folks interact with them. And Mr. Cassis is coming up later on, and he kind of handles our customer solutions business, and he'll be able to give you more specifics about what solar is doing, because his organization is tasked with interacting with those individuals that have a desire to do that and make it come to fruition. And he's had some success with that, solar and batteries.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir, and charging stations too. Yes,
All
sir.
right, Mr. Casson, go ahead.
Thank you. I guess along those lines now, just maybe one more question on that.
Sure,
as related
many as you
maybe
want,
to-
sir.
Well, maybe it's related to cost and rates. Thinking in terms of what all I think I just heard, and you'd mentioned dispatchable resources. You have to have dispatchable resources, especially with the intermittency. Correct. And with battery, it might be 4 hours, but not always used 4 hours. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is relative to cost. If I wanted to run this utility as effectively and as efficiently as I can, how would I do that? And is there some break point, or does it matter if you have a gigawatt of solar or 2 gigawatts of solar that's free energy? But is there any increased cost because of a dispatchable unit? Because it wouldn't be the more efficient thing you would use. I'm just trying to understand where's the break point.
Yeah, and that's why I'd love for you to be able to come in our system control. Let me paint you a picture. You'll see a screen, and it'll show existing asset, Columbia Energy Center, and it'll show Jasper, and it'll be on a board. And then we have a solar desk. We have to staff a solar desk. We have a hard enough time predicting the weather. Now we got to start trying to predict radiation coming from the sun. as far as what our load is going to be and estimate. And that's a challenge. It's hard enough to predict just the weather and whether it's going to rain or not and what the wind's going to blow. And so if you came in there, you would see these screens and you would see transmission and distribution solar on a screen. And you would see the fluctuations that it has. And you'd see how it was auto-synced with those two natural gas units. Remember, natural gas can go up and down. It's like an accelerator and a brake in your car. You don't get that with a coal plant to that degree, that flexibility. And so that's why those units are so flexible, because they auto-sync with it. And we also keep up with every profile every day. We have a history of what solar looks like. And when that joker looks like Cinderella's castle, going up and down like it did yesterday with the storms that came through our service territory, those plants are whoof, boom, boom, boom. And you either have gas or you have Fairfield pump storage that are sitting there tracking. Well, when you start moving around that generation resource, it puts some wear and tear on it. These units are made to run all out. They're made to run all out. So we have various things. I think they call it that variable integration cost. And it shouldn't be lost on you that there are things that we have to do behind the scenes besides just transmission assets in order to handle the solar. Like I said, solar is a great part of our resource mix, but because of its intermittent nature, you can't wake up in the morning and say, okay, well, we know we're going to have this. I know if Columbia Energy Center runs all out, it's going to be 640 megawatts and I can plan on it. I can't do the same thing with solar. And that's the difference between dispatchable and intermittent. And those are the two adjectives you need to remember when you start talking about generation in that regard. And Fairfield Pump Storage gives us the ability to handle it. Our natural gas units give us the ability to handle it. And that's why until we are able to bridge the gap to some new technology, you just need to face the reality, at least in my opinion, that natural gas and its flexibility is going to be the answer to be paired with the increasing growth of solar on our system in South Carolina.
All right, I believe I understand the difference between intermittent and dispatchable, but thank you.
Yes, sir.
And perhaps we'll dig deeper into this at a later date on another thing.
Yes, sir.
And on the Monticello Reservoir, I'm vaguely familiar. I think I've even been by there years back when I was a kid. But kind of functions like Bad Creek during off-peak times.
Exactly.
You pump up to it and flush the toilet to run the turbines when you need it.
Yes, sir. If you've ridden you've been on I-20, if you've ridden over the Broad River, the Parr Reservoir flows into the Broad River and comes on into Columbia. And that's where we pump from that lower elevation up to Monticello, which is right there at the upper elevation with VC Summer. Monticello is used as a heat sink for the nuclear plant, and it's also used to run Fairfield Pump Storage. So those people back then that could get things built, that was brilliant on their part to build those two facilities, because I can tell you Fairfield Pump Storage saves our bacon every single day in how it is dispatched and run now. Phenomenal facility. Just like Bad Creek. Glad we got it.
I'm a little familiar with reservoirs and such. So.
Yes, sir. I know you are.
That said, let me get to these questions if I have time. Thinking about in response to a question from Commissioner Belser yesterday, you'd indicated that the cost sought for recovery in the rate case or representative investments, that the company made that's not currently in rates. And the purpose of the rate case are to recover those costs that the company has previously incurred. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And I'm looking at you, but either one.
Yeah, that's correct.
And South Carolina law provides for a historic test year, correct?
Yes, sir.
And do you both agree that the efficiently run utility of efficient management and planning can help maintain and keep costs low or lower, and therefore maybe mitigate rate shock and, to customers. If everybody does their job well and it's really run efficiently, effectively, should that be an outcome?
Are you saying no rate increase if
No.
it's run efficiently?
Not necessarily no rate increase, but the way I wrote it is, would you agree that efficient utility management and planning can help maintain or keep costs low and mitigate
Sure.
any rate shock or
So efficient operations will definitely keep your O&M expense under control, which we do we expend a tremendous effort to do that, to keep our operating costs as low as possible. But as we're in a growing state, we have to make capital investments to serve new customers. So that is inevitably going to add to the rate base that we need to recover on eventually.
understand.
Okay.
But, two things that are just imprinted in my mind, from years gone by, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Most people don't have a clue. That's some old book now. But one of the things that just stood out to me was begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. And also think about someone else y'all probably never heard of. I think it's Charles Hummel, where he talked about the cost of the tyranny of the urgent at the expense of the important. And what do I mean by any of that? There is a lot of growth, but it didn't happen last night. It's occurring. It's been occurring. Let me read just what I wrote. Can you discuss how Dominion engages in efficient planning to keep costs low and mitigate rate shock? In other words, you don't have to go into the nth degree, but does Dominion do anything like that? Begin with the end in mind. Rates are retrospective, but to help mitigate the rate increase, how are you planning down the road with that in mind?
I'll give you some practical examples because that's the only thing I know practically. And I do believe that I said yesterday, we got a fiduciary responsibility to customers. Just as strong as the fiduciary responsibility we have with shareholders who invest in our company and expect a return. One of the things we did years ago is we said, you get a bucket truck, this is how it's going to be built. This is where the boxes are, and we get it in. There's no fabrication. Don't have to pay mechanics. Don't have to pay a fabricator to be in there welding on a bucket truck and things of that nature. Put together a vehicle team to look at everything we do and to make sure that, hey, this bucket truck you get. If you don't like where the light is or the box is, tough. And we saved a bunch of money by doing that with our line trucks and with our bucket trucks. And guess what? Unfortunately, the fabricators that we have are much less in number. That's a part of efficiency. We go in now and we realize that we were doubling up on each other because mobilization with this vegetation management is something you want to avoid. And so where we have underbuilt distribution on transmission up top, distribution under, when you go out there to trim it, we coordinated between transmission and distribution. So when that crew goes out there to do it, they're doing it at one time in one place for both of the assets that are on the same structure. So you're not crossing over each other, as they go. We have consolidated crew quarters, brought people together in one area. We've been able to do that because of a lot of the systems that we have. Mr. Hall can talk about it, but one of the things that he is from a research and development, unbelievable is our click system, where we allow our employees, because of that click system, it goes out to them and it makes them very efficient as they go and perform their service work. We use that same GPS technology that you have in your own car, where you can, if somebody, for example, has got to go out on the gas side. Let me just go over to the other side. I know that's part of this case, but it goes for the electric too to illustrate. And you have an employee that does valve maintenance, and there are valves all over the metropolitan area. Well, what this does is it gives him a breadcrumb trail, so he's not turning one valve in the northeast in Blythewood and then turning another valve in Lower Richland. He instead has got them all lined up, and that's efficiency. That saves on people power. That saves on gasoline, and various things along those lines. We're investing in new technology that can give us fault data. In other words, there's a tree on the line down in maybe Gardens Corner, like occurred the other night. And instead of the lineman having to sit there and patrol and shine a Q-beam up there, it goes in and it extracts the data of the fault and captures it, and it sends information to them patrolling in the field to give them an approximation of where that fault current occurred. I assure you that I bet we spend 50 to 60% of our time trying to think of things like that make our jobs easier for our employees, yet at the same time create efficiency, save O&M. And if you look at this test case year, our O&M's been flat. We didn't, if it was based upon O&M, it's just the inflationary factors that are on us, and it's the growth that we have, because our operations and maintenance is flat, and we have to do that with the rising cost of parts and pieces, the rising cost of labor. I mean, that's something we're about every single day. So, Commissioner Caston, we're on the same page with you from that, and I could go on and on with other initiatives that we've taken on in that regard, and that's the reason we do it.
I expect if we go on and on much longer, everybody in here is going to be throwing stuff at us.
That'd be okay.
So, you're used to it.
Yes, sir.
That said, I do have some questions I'd like to ask about AMI and all, but are you guys best to do that, or is there someone else better? I'm not better. Is there someone else more informed?
Well, Mr. Randall can take a shot of him if you want to, and then Mr. All, he's your AMI expert.
You okay with that, or you want me to wait?
I can try.
Well, I'll just start and then
Sure.
Stop me. Let's don't waste anybody's time.
There you go. I'm good.
And thinking about the technology, at least our experience was usually the technology was not the weak link, using the technology as a strategy, but including mine, ability to really understand what all it does and really take the time to learn it and do it. That was my and our greatest weakness, generally not the technology. So I'm not an expert on AMI. What is that acronym for?
Advanced
Automated
meter infrastructure.
Advanced metering infrastructure. And oftentimes that has been synonymous with smart meter. Gonna sound like a silly question, but advanced metering infrastructure and smart meter. When I think about infrastructure, advanced metering infrastructure and smart meter, they kind of sound like a little bit different things. Are they the same thing? Is it synonymous?
Yes, sir. It is essentially synonymous. There's two technologies out there. There's an older meter that we had. The new ones that we deployed, the AMI. The AMR was previous, so drive-by technology. You ride by, you wake up the meter, it sends you the readings. The AMI devices that are in the field now are connected in a network, so the meters are talking to each other and feeding up to a head-end system. So we're able to collect data real time. We can initiate functions real time. If we need to disconnect a customer, we can send out a command telling that meter to cut off. So it is a smart meter. AMI meter is a smart meter.
Okay, so it sounds like similar to AMI on water
Correct.
meters, except have to use towers, antennas, and get a signal. Can you guys, or do you do it through your electrical system?
We do not. No, there are routers that are mounted on our poles. So you'll see them sometimes on adjacent to a street light where we got power right there. So there's routers scattered throughout. Now they will hop. So it'll hop from one meter And that meter will take that same data and carry it to the next meter. It'll make a certain number of hops, but then it's got to get to a router from
Got
there.
it.
And it picks up the gas meter readings as well that are nearby and carries those readings to that router.
And it's my understanding you can turn your meters on and off from a remote location. And,
That's correct. Yes, sir. Electric meters can be turned on and off remotely. Gas meters cannot.
and does Dominion, South Carolina, do you read your own meters or contract that out?
We were using a contractor. We're not anymore. We're using AMI. So we're getting those readings through the system.
So
And it was a previously, I believe, an AMR system. So we were getting drive-by kind of readings.
well, that's kind of where I was getting to, is with AMI, where you can start operating things remotely. And if I understood you correctly now, you contracted out the meter reading previously, which was the ride-by, the drive-by. Is that true? I mean, you didn't use your own meter readers, but contract meter reading, or did you have both, or do you know?
Do you know?
It was a combination. There are certain voltages where you got to have a meter reader connector, and we still have meter reader connectors that actually support this system. Not all meters can be read under the AMI based upon, like some demand meters at commercials. And so we still have those. We have to troubleshoot. You have the routers you have to deal with as well. So we had a combination of both, and we still have a combination of contract and company people but that has been for the installation of the AMI meters. We use contractors in order for that, to do that conversion. And then we had I think we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of about 73 less employees involved in that metering enterprise as a result of the improved and advanced technology.
Well, you pre-answered one of my questions. If I understood that correctly, where you are now, you're not fully AMI yet, but you anticipate being fully AMI, other than the meters you described.
Yes, sir. We're on track. Third quarter, we'll be done.
Yeah,
Okay.
98% right now.
Good. And if I understood you, is that a reduction in manpower by 73 people via attrition, or what? Are you basically eliminating 73 FYs?
We are eliminating those full-time equivalents. They are being given preferential treatment to go into other jobs. Some of them have gone into the mailroom. Some of them have gone into the warehouse. Some of them have gone to be gas journeymen. And so we have given them that opportunity to reallocate those resources elsewhere if they're interested. Some of them were at retirement age and decided to retire. Some of them we offered severance as a result of that, and they took advantage of that from that perspective. So it was a host of things. It was something that was well thought out and well planned by Craig All and his team in conjunction with the Human Resources Department.
Okay. So those that took other slots, those were simply vacant slots, or were they slots you created to accommodate them?
No, they were vacant slots.
So in essence, reducing the FTEs and the cost. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Using technology as a strategy. What's the estimated life of a smart meter and its components?
We'll pass that one to Craig All.
All right, Mr. All out there, if I forget to ask you. And is there a concern relative to, I guess, the smart technology either being obsolete or some better version in the next few years, 10 years, 15 years? Or
So the technology is always evolving and improving. However, it serves the functions we need it to serve today, and I don't see that changing. So I think it's going to be effective for the the life of the plant.
All right, I think the rest of my questions, not many. I'll just wait on Mr. All, and I appreciate you gentlemen answering my questions a lot. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Any further commissioner questions? Commissioner Williams, C. Williams.
Thank you, Chair Powers. Good morning.
Good morning.
I know that I had found a couple more questions for Mr. Kassam, and I'm just scrolling through. These are from the customer hearings and things that I think we both heard that night, and just want to give you an opportunity to respond. One is that there were customers who were concerned about the company, and I'm just going to characterize it, and you can correct this as this is right, that the company was against solar, and I think this was related to the time of use rates. Did you hear comments like that? That there was a feeling that there was a discouragement of solar based on the time of use rates?
I heard one specific comment, and then I heard general comments from multiple general comments, nothing really specific. But I think that, as I said before, we heard that in the night hearings. SACE and CCL are a part of this proceeding, and I think some of that time of use, the reason why those hours were adjusted accordingly, was a combination of their positive participation in this settlement, as well as what we heard from those customers at the night hearings. So yes, ma'am, Commissioner Williams, I heard the same things you did, specific and in general.
And do you think the adjustments that are proposed in the settlement reflect some of the concerns that were raised?
I would hope they would. I think there's some people you're never going to convince that utilities aren't against solar any more than I can convince them of anything else. I'm proud of the amount of solar we have on our system. You can go in there, and here's a great point. The amount of solar that we have on our system exceeds the output of any single unit output that we have on our system. Think about that. We got more solar than what comes out of VC Summer, with a third of it going to Santee Cooper. We got more solar than comes out of Jasper, 900 megawatt unit down in Jasper County. So I'm proud of where we are from a solar. But if it was in my if I were to keep my job over being able to satisfy everybody and convince them of that, I'd be gone tomorrow. So that's not something I try to achieve every day. We continue to just work it as best we can as it comes forward. But I do appreciate SACE, CCL, and I also appreciate those customers that came out and voiced their concerns, because it's like anything else. You take what data and information is presented to you, you think about it, and you try to do the best you can in heart, mind, and soul, and I think we have.
And I think as I reflect on it, one difference is that those, in the case I'm thinking about, that was a personal investment as opposed to a company that may have developed a solar array. And so the time of use rates, I think, have a direct impact on an investment that's already been made. Do you have any comment to that?
Just that our thought process is akin. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. There was one individual that talked about the IRP and energy efficiency, and I didn't go back and figure out what that comment was about. Do you know?
I did not talk to that individual after that, so I can't sit here and divine what exactly was on their minds. I think it was more, I remember it. I think it was more of a general statement akin to solar. I think that if you see in this settlement that the money that we're additional monies that are going to NEAP and then going beyond NEAP to perhaps health and safety is a recognition of that. And hopefully that individual can be somebody that can personally take advantage of that.
I think it struck me because I believe in these IRPs, as you all do, and I believe in the settlement agreements. And I think it's important that we kind of from one to the other make sure that we're doing our best job on these commitments. And I'm admitting that as I listened, I did not have a clue what element of the IRP we were talking about, and I feel like I should.
Well, I mean, you look at energy efficiency and demand side management being a way for us to put off having to build generation. And in that regard, I think it's important. It's just as important as some of the generation that we talked about constructing herein today. It's an important aspect of it, just like solar is an important generation aspect. Like I said, it's interesting. You and I talked yesterday about the night hearings, and I wonder, absent the rates, if y'all just decided, hey, let's have some night hearings and let's talk about things going on in the community or things maybe we could do better as a company and in a commission jointly and with stakeholders. I sat there and stared at the ceiling last night and I wonder how many people would show up.
Right.
And so that, the
totally.
rate case, it's never a good time for a rate case. Mr. Burgess said that at the opening in every one of the night hearings, but it is a draw to get people out and get them talking in that regard. That's a challenge for us, I think.
Agreed. A number of times yesterday, you talked about the impact would fall on the shareholders. Would you describe at a general level what that means? I mean, I understand at the simplest level, but did you have to go back to your board to get agreement on these changes? Is there just give me a glimpse into what that means for the company?
Sure. I thought we added a fairly good narrative about the exchange, but maybe I should have talked more about internal. And so, they give me great latitude to do what's best for South Carolina. They realize I've been here my whole life. I'm not going anywhere. I know the people, I know the places, and they give me a lot of latitude, maybe sometimes more than they wish they did. And when I say that, I'm talking about corporate. But with Dominion Energy, you have representatives here today where that Mr. Burgess reports up through legal. They don't report up through me. Mr. Rafferty, who's here, they don't report up through me. Now, they'll tell you I work them like they're brothers of mine and family every single day. I have great regard for them, and I don't. That's one thing you've had to learn with this acquisition is there are no organizational lines, and the leaders in Richmond are very good about that. And so the answer to your question is we were able to decide those here in South Carolina as far as what's best for our ratepayers and these stakeholders that we've worked with for years. I mean, more than decades. I mean, Mr. Elliott over there, we've watched each other kind of in a time chamber age together. I mean, I've known him for so long. And so, you build those relationships, and Dominion Energy Corporate has recognized that those relationships are critical to serving South Carolina. They recognize that. At the same time, there's only a finite amount of capital dollars that they can raise and that they have. And we compete for those capital dollars. And are they going to be invested in South Carolina for reliability and resiliency? And that's why I think the questions about return on equity, regulatory lag, when rates go into effect, how they go out and are able to raise capital, what will it do to our credit rating, and how will that affect expenses? That's real. That is real every day, and we have to fight for every dollar of capital investment. Now, they fully realize we have an obligation to serve, and they're going to support that obligation to serve. But it is a challenge and an opportunity every day to maintain those safety metrics and those reliability metrics that you see there on the screen because they do serve in other jurisdictions. And I don't blame them. It's just like if you were to buy a stock, you're going to buy one that's going to give you the most return. You may be inclined to get one that gives you a stable, continuous return, but you're going to buy one that overall gives you the return that you seek. This company is no different. its shareholders are no different with regards to what they're willing to invest in this company. Its bondholders are no different in that regard. And so that's where the balance comes in. And is there some comparison that goes on when I go up there to Richmond and we have financial meetings and planning meetings and things of that nature? You bet there is. And it's a tough discussion to have sometimes, but that's a part of it. And so I hope that gives you a little more clarity that we have good latitude. We were able to make the decisions involving this case in South Carolina. We would give them a heads up. Yet at the same time, it's no different than economic development. You're going to go to where you have the most opportunity, given the obligation to serve. I hope that helps.
It generally it does. It sounds like there's not that they're relying on you to know where that bottom line is and to keep all of this in a symbiotic, positive direction. Is that a fair summation?
When I think about symbiotic, yes, ma'am. I guess that's a good enough term.
Okay. Well, shifting to kind of the bigger picture and really to the discussion you just led me to, looking at kind of numbers in the 2020 rate case, the settlement agreement provided for an overall annual revenue of, I believe, $61.6 million. And in this proposal, what you're looking at is $219 million. And that's about a 350% increase. Do those numbers sound generally right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What justifies a 350% increase? Are we growing by 350%? I know it's not that simple, but
No, and it's difficult. When I think about that, I don't want to. It's not that simple. If it wasn't that simple, if it were that simple, I don't think we'd have all these stakeholders behind me, and I don't think we'd be going through the settlement agreement and everything we did. It's a give and take. And these are totally different circumstances. If you remember during that last rate case, and I'm sure you do, it's in the middle of COVID. There was great atrophy of the economy. We were even asked not to even come forward with that rate case. And, it was tough to come forward in the middle of all of that with that case, but felt it was important to at least establish a benchmark and move the regulatory construct forward. And I will tell you, since that time, economies have come out of COVID. We still have supply chain issues. We have price increases. We have inflation, and we have volatility, and we have unprecedented growth. And because we have that unprecedented growth, I mean, Commissioner Belser asked me yesterday, why are we in here with this $1.6 billion? Transmission lines, for example, there's a regulation involving transmission. And you saw the hundreds of millions of dollars we've had to spend on transmission, where you do these studies of your system and where your growth pockets are. We talked about the solar being over there on the western edge. We talked about all the growth we have down in Bluffton and Charleston and the march up I-26. And we have these system operation limitation projects that say, thou shalt go in and rebuild this transmission line. And you will build it with bundled conductor. You will go build new transmission. And they don't ask you to do it. You shall do it. And you are on the clock to get it done. And if you don't, you're going to get fined and censured and have somebody else coming in here doing your transmission planning function. And so do I think as you construe it with some 300 and something % based upon what was asked or what was this, I can't deny the pragmatic numbers that you put before me. I mean, I took, math and algebra and all that good stuff coming along, and what the numbers you present are straight up. But they can't be made in the context of not knowing how transformative South Carolina the transformative growth that we're undergoing, adding 40,000 customers across this test period, unprecedented economic growth and development, changes in demographics. South Carolina is the number one state where people are migrating. And so from that standpoint, is it 300% growth as you say it? No, ma'am, it's not. But all those things coming together, I can assure you those $1.6 billion were spent effectively, efficiently, and in order to serve the customers of South Carolina under the obligation of service that we have. And like I said, my goal, it's a matter of moral character, is to present as clean a case as you can, just as it is to run as clean a system every day as you possibly can. And that's very important. It comes when, when I have a group of people, it goes all the way when I have a group of people that I take to lunch, and I could call it a business lunch, I put it on my credit card. When my employees travel, they have the ability, overnight, you can get a food stipend. I said, well, you're going to eat anyway. So it goes down to the smallest things that you do. First you make your habits, then your habits make you. And I believe that's not just for an individual, but for a corporation and an organization. And that's how I try to run this efficiently and effectively. And thank God the O&M is where it is, flat. And that's something I'm proud of. And we presented a clean case, because all the things that are disallowed, they're very troublesome, and they're going to be very difficult in order to adjust to from that perspective.
So the revenue adjustment that's needed to support the cash flow that you need and the earnings, this mean did the previous revenue needed not support enough cash flow with the 9.5%?
No, ma'am, it didn't. And Mr. Phibbs is the person who can talk more about this. Let me give you him. He's the expert in this matter. And he has educated me a lot since he came down from Richmond. He's our chief financial officer. He and his wife and family moved here. And one thing I can say about him, when folks come down from Richmond, I always look, do they rent or do they buy? Mr. Phibbs has bought. His family and his daughter are here, and he's solid, and he's taught me a lot, and he'll be able to talk to you about that because, as Dabo says, he's all in.
Thank you. I do have a question for you, Mr. Randall, or a couple of questions. And it starts out with Sadie and Safi, and just a clarification. Does the Sadie metric, what metric is Sadie based on that represents the average customer?
It's the system average interruption duration index, so it's across the customer base.
So it's all customers. It's a big global number.
It's a global number.
Okay. And does it exclude interruptible customers?
Yes, it would not count somebody who's off for, because it's an interrupted cycle. It's looking at outages.
Okay. And when you all talk about the top quartile, can you define that better in terms of how Dominion is, because when I hear top quartile, I think about, is it the top 25%, top 10%, top 1%?
Yes, we get a report every year from the SCE that provides a list of all the member companies and what their SAIDI results are for the year. So we all voluntarily report in, and they break it into quartiles. Top 25% are in this bundle and so forth, and we're always above that.
Stupid question on my part. I'm sorry. Quartile. Yep.
All right, you got it.
No, it's not.
Well, yeah, I get it now. It's hard to ask everything and then
problem.
realize when you hear yourself talking what that really means.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. Not a problem.
Okay. And has the company explored any other system reliability indices? We've started hearing about some others. I've got the names in front of me, but I'll let you, you're shaking your head, so I'll let you take it from there.
Yes, ma'am. We track a number of reliability metrics through our distribution dispatch group. And I'm not going to be able to name them all for you, but we track safety, Katie. There's several of them that they pull that data out of our dispatch system and report to us on a monthly basis.
So I can't do them by their acronyms, but like, I think you just referenced one like this, customers experiencing long interruption durations.
I think that's Katie.
Okay. Are we seeing in my first 3.5 years, we heard Sadie and Safety, and now we're starting to hear the others that reflect more specific, more granular information. Mm-hmm. Is there a trend toward that? And is the company tracking using those as well?
We've been asked more frequently from commissioners and others for data related to that. So yeah, I think the trend's moving that way, and I think we do report those numbers to the SCE as well. So it's data that we do track, we do capture, and we've got it available.
Another thing, Commissioner Williams, that we do is we do a deep dive beyond just what those anagrams, what they tell us. I mean, every month we get a report that tells us what are the circuits that were out and impacted the most, why were they impacted. We can tell you down to the percent of how many were related to trees, how many were related to vegetation, how many related to squirrels.
Pigeons.
729 squirrels year to date. If they didn't
This
have
year.
Yes, ma'am. They didn't have a tail, they wouldn't even get on it, but then they'd be rats, I reckon. But the bottom line is we look at each one of those, and I'll tell you the most dangerous trend that is evolving, car hit poles.
Why?
We had 59 car hit poles in 1 month, and they take a long time to go out there and change that 800-pound pole out.
Yeah. The record, would you describe that? Because Miss Sally
not
can't.
going to reflect what you just did, Mr.
Texting and driving.
Texting and driving. Distracted driving. That's what it is. It used to be people that were drunk in the middle of the night. Now, unfortunately, it's young people when they get out of school. And it happens all throughout the day. And that's something that we really need to focus on, texting and driving.
Thank you for the demonstration and the words related to that, and for bringing it up, because it's something we've heard about, and I don't know what any of us do about it, but I understand the implication it has to your polls and to service. So,
I mean, and just the young people. I mean, it's tragic. It's tragic to go and see it, and our linemen drive up on it and see it on a regular basis, and it's terrible.
thank you very much. I have no more questions, Mr. Chair.
We've been going about 2 hours now. I think it's a good time for a break. If we could take about a 15-minute break, come back at about 20 till 12. We'll go for a little bit longer, then we'll break for lunch. And then, of course, we got to take care of the town of Winsboro this afternoon, and we'll run in as long as we can. There may be a couple more questions, so I'd ask you gentlemen return to where you are. In the meantime, of course, you know you can't talk to your attorneys about anything, but
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
We'll be back at 20 till 12.
Yes, sir.
Welcome back to the Public Service Commission. We are continuing in this hearing on docket number 2024-34E. We have a panel before us. Is there any more questions for this panel?
Chair.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. I just have one question, and this is really kind of a follow-up of questions yesterday in connection with low-income customers and all that we heard from them. And this is really more just kind of trying to be a little bit forward-thinking. So who would be a good witness to continue those sorts of questions in connection with options for the future that might be considered to?
You thinking energy efficiency or DSM kind of initiatives?
It's probably as much rate design or programs or I don't really know.
I would say it's probably a combination of Mr. Rooks on rate design, and then Ms. Shelton has probably got more direct interaction in her team with our customers as anybody who is testifying on behalf of Dominion Energy South Carolina.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Yes, sir.
Anything further? Thank you, gentlemen. You may step down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the commission.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ziegler, go ahead. I couldn't miss you with that hair. It's as white as mine.
Can you hear me now? Is that working? Excellent. Mr. Kassam, in your summary of your rebuttal testimony and your direct, or particularly the summary of the rebuttal, you mentioned certain points of disagreement that the company had with ORS and its witnesses before the settlement was issued. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And that rebuttal testimony, of course, was drafted before the settlement was entered into, correct?
That's correct. We had direct testimony, then we had rebuttal.
Now, yesterday you testified that the company strongly supports the settlement in this case. Is that still the case?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
And the settlement is a package, isn't it?
Yes, sir. No one-offs. It's an integrated settlement that came from the hard work over a good period of time with the interveners. Yes, sir.
And is it the case that ORS led the effort to create that settlement?
Yes, sir. The executive director, Andrew Bateman, was a point person. I made a commitment to him early on before it even started to immediately turn around any terms that came from the parties. And I also commented yesterday that momentum, I think, was critical to us being able to resolve this. I apologize to the commission for it being last minute, but nonetheless, I believe that settlement is an outstanding outcome, and we are all in agreement with it.
And so nothing in what you've said today in any way changes that sense of support and appreciation for what ORS has accomplished here. Is that correct?
When I was reading my testimony today, I was like, well, that's kind of counter to the agreement that I testified to yesterday. And it can get kind of confusing when you look at it, because it was kind of confusing when I was reading it today in the spirit of it. But like I said, there are technical aspects of the hearing process that I've come to respect. I think I testified here the first time 33 years ago, and it's interesting kind of how you have to kind of backtrack, but that's how the due process works, and we certainly support that. So no one should infer anything in that direct or rebuttal that in any way takes away from the overall consensus of this settlement.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you for those questions. I think it was very clear yesterday, and I made a point of questioning all parties that this, I think by their responses, this is a full settlement now. We're going to continue with your next witnesses, but I think during the lunch break, I think the commission is going to look at just who we need to hear from and be able to tell you that. There's a lot of witnesses we could hear from, and this could take a long time, and it could be a waste of some time. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission.
Company wants to call your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The company calls Michael Brandon Phibbs and Jennifer Nelson to the stand.
Please come forward.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start with you, Mr. Phibbs. Could you please state your full name for the record?
Michael Brandon Phibbs.
And Keller already told the commission this, but could you please confirm your role with the company?
Vice President of Financial Management.
And did you cause to be prepared or prepare under your direction 34 pages of direct testimony pre-filed in this docket?
I did.
And if I asked you all the questions contained in that pre-filed direct testimony here today, would your answers be the same?
They would.
Chair Powers, I move the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Phibbs be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Pre-filed direct testimony, Mr. Phibbs, will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. And Ms. Nelson, could you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Jennifer E. Nelson.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Concentric Energy Advisors as an assistant vice president.
Thank you. And did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 76 pages of pre-filed direct testimony?
I did.
And I believe you might have one minor correction to that direct testimony.
I do have one small typo to correct. In my direct testimony, page 68, line 5, the sentence that says, on January 31st, 2023, should be corrected to say January 31st, 2024.
Thank you. And Ms. Nelson, if I asked you all the questions contained in that pre-filed testimony to include that correction from the stand, would your answers remain the same?
Yes, they would.
Chair Powers, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony as corrected today be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed direct testimony as corrected by Ms. Jennifer Nelson today will be placed into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Nelson, did your pre-filed direct testimony include exhibits labeled JEN 1 through JEN 9?
Yes.
And Chair Powers, I move those exhibits labeled JEN 1 through JEN 9 be entered into the record as composite hearing, I believe, Exhibit 12.
They will be, the exhibits 1 through 9, JEN 1 through 9 will be entered in as the record as Exhibit 12.
Thank you. And Mr. Phibbs, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 32 pages of rebuttal testimony pre-filed in the docket?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any corrections to that rebuttal testimony?
Yes, one correction on page 28, line 7. Could we strike, quote, earnings call in May and insert instead investor meeting on March 1?
All right.
Certainly. It was on page 28, line 7. You'll see a phrase, earnings call in May. If that could be struck through, and investor meeting on March 1st be substituted.
And you are asking that be put in the record?
I am. Mr. Phibbs, subject to your correction today, if I asked you all of the corrections in your pre-filed rebuttal testimony, would your answers remain the same today?
They would.
Mr. Chair, I do move that his pre-filed rebuttal testimony, subject to correction today, be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed rebuttal testimony with corrections as made today shall be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Phibbs, did your pre-filed rebuttal testimony include exhibits MPB1 through MPB4?
They did.
Chair Powers, can we move MPB1 through MPB4 as attached to Mr. Phibbs' pre-filed rebuttal testimony as the next composite hearing exhibit?
Exhibits MBP 1 through 4 will be entered as Exhibit 13 into the record.
Thank you. And Ms. Nelson, did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 150 pages for rebuttal testimony pre-filed in the docket?
Yes, I did.
If I asked you all the questions in that pre-filed rebuttal testimony today, would your answers remain the same?
Yes, they would.
Chair Powers, I move Ms. Nelson's pre-filed rebuttal testimony be moved into the record as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Ms. Nelson, consisting of 150 pages, will be entered into the record as given orally from the stand, and the confidential version will remain confidential.
Thank you. I appreciate you refreshing my recollection on that. Thank you. And Ms. Nelson, did your pre-filed rebuttal testimony include exhibits labeled JEN 10 through JEN 23?
Yes.
Chair Powers, can we move JEN 10 through JEN 23 into the record as composite hearing exhibit 14?
JEN 10 through 23 is into the record as exhibit 14. And as to that, JEN 21 only is the confidential part.
That's correct. Thank you. And in lieu of summaries, Mr. Chair, we will tender the panel to the commission for questions with the parties having waived cross-examination.
Thank you very much. Any commissioner questions? Chair, Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Still good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
So, Mr. Phibbs, I think you probably heard me ask a question yesterday that be directed towards you, and that relates to the company and the subsidiaries and the allowed ROEs, the equity component of the capital structure, and when those were approved and by state. Can you run through that?
Yes, sir, I can. I'll start with the electric operations, which I think is most apropos to this case. Our Dominion Energy Virginia segment is currently has a 9.7% ROE with a 52.1% authorized equity ratio. This was adjudicated or final order as of 2024, so very recent. And I'll note in Virginia that 60% of the rate base is under rider treatment and 40% under base rates with forward-looking rate making.
Okay, and you said that was a 9.7 ROE
That's correct.
and 52.1
That's correct.
equity, and the end of 2024. Excuse me.
The commission order for what I described was early in 2024, so it's a fresh case.
All right.
Dominion Energy North Carolina, which is the North Carolina portion of our Virginia service territory, last had a rate order in 2020 with a 9.75% ROE and a 52% authorized equity ratio.
All right.
Okay. Would you like the gas utilities that we currently own as well, or no?
Yes.
Okay. And again, for the gas utilities, they may have different risk factors than the electric side.
Right.
But we do have PSC in North Carolina, which was last ordered in 2022 with a 9.6% ROE and a 51.6% equity ratio. And then Dominion Energy South Carolina, our gas side of the business, as you might recall, last year in 2023, we received a 9.49% ROE and a 54.78% equity ratio.
All right.
I think that's the list that we own currently. Yes, sir.
Okay. So what about Ohio? What's going on in Ohio?
So Ohio, Utah, and Wyoming have been divested during 2024.
All right. Appreciate that.
Sure thing.
Mr. Chairman.
So
Commissioner Bells.
Oh, no, I thought he was three. I'm sorry.
I have one question for Ms. Nelson. Was wondering if you could give me a high-level overview of the CAPM method and the perspective that that brings to the whole process of determining a fair and appropriate ROE.
Sure. And I'll just step back a little to kind of provide a perspective that, and I know you've asked about the CAPM model specifically. There are multiple models that can be used to try to estimate investors' required equity returns. Unlike the cost of debt, which can be observable in the market, the cost of equity is not observable. So we've developed a number of models, and I say we in terms of, the financial community and academics and holistically speaking there, a number of models to try to estimate investors' required return because we can't truly precisely pinpoint what that number is. And the CAPM is one of those models, as well as the discounted cash flow model, the risk premium model, and there are multiple other approaches. Certainly you should use multiple models to try to estimate the return because, as you mentioned, each model brings a particular perspective, and the CAPM brings a unique perspective relative to other models. The CAPM does try to estimate that relationship between risk of a particular company or asset and the return required by investors, and that relationship is proportional. So as the risk increases, the required return also increases. There are a number of inputs. The CAPM is a very simple model, and it requires 3 or 4 general inputs. One of those is a risk-free rate. The second input is the estimated market risk premium, which is, by definition, the difference between the expected market return and the risk-free rate. And the third input is the beta coefficient, which is a measure of relative risk of the company or the asset that you're evaluating relative to the overall market. So it's a measure of trying to adjust the company's risk relative to the overall market. And I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. That helps. That's all I had.
Commissioner Belson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize to Commissioner Thomas for jumping the gun there. Mr. Phibbs, I just quickly, in your rebuttal testimony, I believe you referenced that that Dominion Energy South Carolina has not sought or received, and maybe I'm putting words there, infusion of capital from the parent company. Is that correct?
Correct. What the question and the statement there was refuting certain interveners who thought that Dominion Energy was infusing equity into Dominion Energy South Carolina, and outside of litigation settlements, which would be, I'll call it cash in, cash out, it wouldn't stick on the balance sheet of South Carolina, nor be equity that would be adjudicated within this proceeding. We have not introduced equity into Dominion Energy South Carolina since the merger and completion of the merger order commitments to target a 50 to 55% equity ratio.
And thank you for that. The merger was in 2018, right?
Yes.
Okay. Under what circumstances, or are there circumstances where the parent may need to put capital into Dominion Energy South Carolina?
I think the primary example that I might use is just the tremendous amount of capital that's required here. I've outlined in testimony that we expect on average $900 million of electric-related capital to go into business over the next 3 years. As we think beyond that for coal transition or dispatchable resource builds, there might be the need for an infusion of capital since the retained earnings of the business might not be enough to build out the infrastructure that's required without an infusion in order to keep the debt and equity ratio in a reasonable spot for both credit metrics and a capital structure perspective.
How would the market and investors view if it was necessary for the parent to put capital into the subsidiary here in South Carolina?
As long as we were putting capital into Dominion Energy South Carolina with the auspices that it was for projects or capital infrastructure that would receive fair regulatory returns and cash flow returns, it really wouldn't be viewed negatively by the market and might actually be viewed positively from a perspective of the ability to grow out a high growth service territory.
Okay. Is it important to investors that the operating company here in South Carolina be able to stand on its own, so to speak?
Yes, it definitely is more so on the bondholder side of the coin. As you likely know, when we go out for debt issuances, we do so under Dominion Energy South Carolina. So bondholders look more so to ascertain the credit worthiness of the business absent, and for lack of a better word, I'll say lifelines. They want to say, like, Dominion Energy does not have to infuse equity in the business. So bondholders typically think of, I'll call it risk-averse type scenarios. So one of the risk-averse type scenarios is we can't get capital or can't get equity capital. How does my investment perform? So they might do an analysis more on a standalone basis than maybe an equity investor would.
Switching gears just a little bit, how do investors in the market look at the frequency of rate cases? Does that come into play with regard to, okay, we come in every year, every other year, every 4 or 5 years? How does the frequency of the filing of a rate case impact investor expectations? Or
That's a very good question. I would say two things. The thing that investors will care most about is ensuring that they're earning a fair return. So that's first and foremost. Then behind that, with respect to the question on frequency of rate cases, all else equal, in order to earn that fair return, a lack of fully adjudicated proceedings would be seen as lowering the financial risk of the utility, as long as they can continue to earn a fair return. Because a fully adjudicated rate case definitely provides a high degree of risk of outcome, because we'll come present our case, interveners will present their case, and then commission will rule on said case. And sometimes it's hard to handicap where that result may be for an investor. And if you're having a hard time handicapping where a result of a rate case may be, if you're looking to invest in that, either invest in a bond or invest in equity, you might place a higher risk premium or a lower value on those securities in order to invest. So I think the best models would be ones where fair and consistent returns are earned, but not necessarily through serial full rate cases.
Well, but to that statement of fair and returns being earned, I mean, once the rate case is over, it's up to the utility to make the decision of when to come back in. Is that, unless there's an over-earning situation, which is a different story, but
Yes.
would that be a correct statement?
It's correct that it's our election after this case, per se, to when we would come back in. But as I stated, first and foremost, investors will look for a fair earned return. And certain rate-making structures, and I know folks have read my direct and rebuttal testimony, such as forward-looking test years or in-between rate case cost recovery mechanisms, certainly allow a utility to stay out for longer while earning that return.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Nelson, you're off the hook with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Belser. Any further questions? Commissioner Caston?
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Nelson, can you expound on why you rely on the average of the mean and median proxy group in the constant growth DCF results? And why the low and high were not relied on in your analysis? And that was in your direct testimony, I think.
Sure. So I explained in my direct testimony, when I developed my constant growth DCF analysis, I did present a low, mean, and high result for each proxy company. And the purpose of that is to really show the range of results that are produced primarily by the growth rate assumptions for each proxy company. So I like to provide the commission the full range of those results. And then I take, for the entire proxy group, you're correct that I took the average of the proxy group mean and median in order to develop my recommendation. And the benefit of doing that is that the average, now if you think of both measures mathematically, they're both trying to reach a conclusion around what is the central measure of tendency. And the average treats all of the proxy group company results equally. So each of the results is weighted the same. The median, on the other hand, is the middle result. So you would rank all of the results and pick the middle result as the median. So the median is less affected by outliers or high or low growth rates or results, pardon me. So on the one hand, the average will give consideration to each of the proxy group results, while the median will also mitigate those outliers and the effect on the overall results. So you can take the two together. I average the two together in order to give that consideration to each of the proxy group companies while also mitigating outliers.
Well, I get that. But what I was curious about, and I couldn't see in this, like when you talk about an outlier, and I get it, scatter diagram, I got one up here, one over here. But from just that figure 5 and that little chart, I guess, it didn't tell me, is it an outlier or is the low, is that
Let me just pull up
2,
figure
3,
5 here.
5?
Pardon me. So figure 5 presents, again, that range of results. So, for example, you look at the row 30-day average. This is the proxy group. The average of the proxy group mean and median using the lowest growth rate, using the average of all three growth rates. I use three sources of growth rates in my analysis, so the mean would take the average of those three. And then the high would take the highest of the growth rates for each proxy company. Pardon me. So again, that's giving you the full spectrum. So your question, I think, as I understand it, is how do I develop my recommendation from these results? Is that your question?
Let's let that be the question for now.
All right. And so I look to all of the results, not just the constant growth DCF results, but all the results from my models. And you look at the mean results, for example, of the constant growth DCF. They're right around that 9.9% range. And so that kind of formed the low end of my recommendation. So my recommended range in this case was 9.9% to 11.4%. So I focused on the mean results there. Now, when I was talking about outliers, I was thinking about from an individual proxy company perspective. So if you went to the exhibit and you looked at the DCF results for a particular company and you were trying to evaluate the reasonableness of one company versus another, giving some weight to the median would mitigate the highest result and the lowest DCF result for a proxy company.
Okay. And again, I'm not being critical of it. I'm trying to understand it, but I was thinking, when you talk about outliers, whether that's a scatter diagram or I'm thinking like a bell curve, whether it's flatter or a higher peak, it would be, what I'm trying to understand is if I think of it in terms of a bell curve, is it a narrow slice or how many low were there? Were there one low? Or were there two low? Were there three low? Was there 5 high, 1 high? That's
Sure.
what I was trying to kind of understand.
Okay, I think I
and it may
understand.
be here somewhere and I just didn't see it.
Well, for example, if I turn to my exhibit JEN2, which is my constant growth DCF analysis, and I'm going to look at column 10, which is the mean results for each company. As I mentioned, I use 3 sources of growth rates, and they're all sources relied upon by the financial and investment community.
Okay.
You have a range of DCF results. Again, this is in column 10. From the lowest result is 7.8%. And that looks like it's...
Excuse me 1 minute. Are you on JEN-2?
That's correct. Page 1.
Or are you on the low or the mean?
I'm on the mean.
Oh, okay.
Sir.
Okay.
Yep.
Now we're on the same. Yes.
So it looks like the lowest individual proxy company mean DCF result is 7.8%, and that's for Ida Corp. And then the highest result looks like it is 11.75%, and that is for NextEra Energy, Inc. So that's the full range of the proxy company mean DCF results. Now, your question as to whether these are outliers. Now, by using the median, that gives less weight to the high end and low end of those results. The question I hear you asking is, are those outliers? And that's really kind of a statistical type question, and there's a number of tests we can do to try to pinpoint whether they're outliers. And the way that statisticians usually try to define an outlier is look to what is the average difference of all of your observations from the mean, and how far is any one observation from that average. Typically, when I look at these results, I might consider whether some of the results are outliers, and I might run a few statistical tests to determine that. Based on it, I didn't present it in this testimony because when I prepared my testimony, none of the growth rates, which primarily drive the results, the individual results in the DCF analysis, were not outliers. So the median still does give less weight to the high and low ends, but from a statistical perspective, I did not find that any of the results were truly outliers, if that makes sense.
Well, I think so. Because as I look at that column 9, the low ROE, and kind of go through it there, maybe at least to me, when I glance at it, look at it, an outlier might be the 5.1, but the rest all seem to be in some kind of range, with that group mean being 8.62.
Sure.
On the low side. High side, 10.95. And, the when you chose the mean, I think it was 9.8. We're 9.83 on this. I guess that's what I was, and I guess I'm still kind of trying to understand it, but I won't ask you to elaborate anymore. I mean, I understand the mean.
Sure.
I understand the average.
Yep.
But, the range from the low, if the average, you're going from 10.81 to 5.1.
I agree. I think when you mentioned the 5.1%, that is certainly well below my estimate of what a reasonable return would be for DESC or for an vertically integrated electric utility. That's why I give very little weight to the low end of the results. I similarly don't give as much weight to the higher end of the results. So focusing on the mean growth rates, in my opinion, is the reasonable balance between those two. But I do provide the full spectrum of those results so you can see that full range.
I understand that. And if I counted it right, there's 18 companies here that you used, and that was one number,
Correct.
5.1.
Correct.
But the others are 10.08, 8, 8.6, 11.27 in the low range. I won't ask any more about that. I mean, you gave it to us to see, but the range was based on your mean, not the necessarily the mean of the lows and the highs.
Correct.
Okay. Let's move on. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't have I didn't write down the page, but can you clarify what you mean, omit, I guess relative to DCA witness Rothschild's lacking sufficient data? I just kind of wrote it, and I don't remember where it was in your testimony, but that was something that caught my eye.
Sure.
Could you elaborate on that or clarify that? What was lacking?
So I had two primary concerns with his analysis, and as you probably read and understand, much of his analysis relies on data through stock options. And unlike stock prices, there is the options are very thinly traded relative to company equities. So that was my first concern. And if you turn to, let me see, page 115 of my rebuttal testimony. Let's see. Nope. Pardon me, that's the wrong page. 91. I have figure 12 on page 91. This presents proxy companies, the proxy group companies, and the options volume for each of those companies. And you'll see that for either call options or put options, there's some companies that have very low volume. So there are no trades going on. And this was on a particular day, I'll say. And I pulled this from Mr. Rothschild's work papers. So for some companies, you have sometimes no trades, sometimes just a handful. So in my opinion, it's really difficult to try to discern whether this type of data that is very limited and thinly traded truly reflects investors' expectations, given the limited nature of this data. So that was one issue, and that's more of a global concern about relying on options data, particularly for the utility industry and utility stocks. The other concern that I raised was in going through Mr. Rothschild's work papers, there were, and I presented an exhibit demonstrating this analysis. And it is exhibit JEN 17 in my rebuttal testimony. So he uses options to develop two components of pardon me, his analysis. One is to develop the growth rates in his DCF analysis, as well as to develop beta coefficients. And again, this data is directly from Mr. Rothschild's work papers. You can see that I've highlighted a number of data points, either in orange or red. This data reflects, the colors, either orange or red, reflects data points that were interpolated by Mr. Rothschild. So there was no data available for these dates. And he made a judgment as to how to correct for the fact that there was no data for these dates for these companies. So again, he's inserted some of his own subjective judgment around that. Again, just speaking to the concern that I have that there is limited data for options for utility companies, and it doesn't give you the broad measure of how investors actually value a company. When we think about what is the return that equity investors require, we're thinking about an investor's valuation assessment. What is the price, stock price I'm willing to pay for one share of stock? And what are my return requirements that go into that valuation? And options are not part of that assessment. They are market-based. I'll give Mr. Rothschild that piece, that they are market-based, but it's measuring something entirely different. People purchase options for an entirely different purpose than purchasing and evaluating the value of a stock investment. So those are my concerns in terms of the limited nature of stock option data for utility companies.
Well, I probably should ask all that differently, so, but I appreciate the response. I guess, let me ask it this way, relative to any of the interveners, not just him, but would it be fair to characterize, I guess, any, I don't know if I'd call it criticism, or maybe it was, but a disagreement with maybe inputs and assumptions made in models, is that a more fair characterization, or is it just a vehement, no, it's absolutely wrong and I don't agree with it?
In terms of the DCA specific analysis, or generally speaking for all the different analyses presented?
Since I kind of opened that can of worms, I guess in general, but, you know, you were talking about that specific
Sure.
one.
Generally speaking, I'd say that by and large, the differences in my recommendation versus the analyses put forth by the other interveners is driven by a difference of opinion and inputs. The DCA specifically with this particular analysis, it is different than, he's the only one that puts forth this option implied analysis. So there is a difference there in just the choice of modeling. So I do disagree with the use of options for the purpose of estimating the cost of equity. There's a fundamental disagreement on that piece. Certainly, I disagree with some of the inputs as well. But generally speaking, I think putting aside the DCA's analysis and recommendations, there was overlap among the parties in the ROE recommendations, particularly for those witnesses that put forth an independent analysis of the return. There was some overlap between our range of results and recommendations. So to me that, and we did all rely on the same proxy group, so really that speaks to primarily a difference in inputs.
So pretty much inputs. And
Pretty much
And I'm not
inputs.
trying to circle back to whether you used the low range, the high range, the means of those. But if, for example, the inputs you chose to use or someone else would have chosen to use would have been the low mean up to the high mean, that would have given you a different range, correct?
Certainly, using different inputs would give you different results. But again, looking to the different recommendations put forth by the three or four of the other witnesses, there was some overlap in there, in even their choice to use different inputs. So there was some overlap in our ranges and recommendations. Could kind of get to a consensus looking through those results that way.
Okay. I'll maybe have a question or two later on that for others. Finally, although I don't think you're part of you didn't have settlement testimony or anything, but do you support the settlement as filed?
I do, yes. The recommended ROE and capital structure, the ROE is at the low end of my recommended range, so I believe it is reasonable. It does reflect a reasonable balance of the varied positions, particularly on ROE put forth in this case, so I do support it.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Mr. Phipps?
Yes, sir.
I have absolutely nothing for you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Chair Powers.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. So, Mr. Phipps, do you support the settlement agreement?
Yes, sir, I do.
All right. And Ms. Nelson, I have a follow-up question for you. So in connection with the CAPM method and the discounted cash flow method, which do you view as taking into account, better taking into account market risk?
Certainly the CAPM more directly reflects market risk through the beta coefficient as well as through the risk-free rate. As the risk-free rate increases, that means investors are requiring a higher return from a risk-free investment, and then equity investors require a premium upon that. So that would tend to demonstrate the direction of the change in risk and the change in the equity return. So the CAPM more directly reflects changes in risk over time. The other methods do so more indirectly. So as, for example, investors change risk, their expectations of risk change, that would affect the price they're willing to pay for a stock price. It might change their expectations of a company's growth rate, and those components would show up in the DCF model, but less directly so.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Commissioner C. Williams.
Thank you, Chair Powers. Hello, good to see you all again.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Ms. Nelson, in your testimony, I want to just get a general understanding of something you said in there related to the risk associated with the company having a higher risk associated with exposed to nuclear generation risk. In looking at comparable proxy companies, you raise that, and this, I'm looking at page 7, and you reference, explain in more detail in sections 4 and 5. And I found myself looking at a chart on figure 14, but I really am just trying to understand what it is about the company's risk profile related to nuclear generation risk that is higher than its peers, which is coming from lines 9 through 12 on page 7.
Sure. So the risk associated with the ownership of nuclear generation is a distinct risk relative to some other forms of generation. Certainly there's a heightened environmental risk associated with that. There can be heightened compliance measures associated with nuclear, capital and O&M requirements that are maybe different than other forms of generation. And the credit rating agencies and investors recognize that unique elevated risk associated with nuclear generation. In terms of figure 14, what I presented here was the proxy group, and I looked to the most current year I had available at the time that I've prepared my direct testimony. And what I did was list, so for the companies that do have nuclear generation, you can see, and again, this is for 2022, the company had 27.26% of its total net generation in megawatt hours came from its nuclear generation. Whereas if you took the average and the median of the proxy companies that own nuclear generation, so I've excluded from this calculation companies that do not own nuclear. If I put a 0 in for those companies instead of NA, that will change the calculation of the average and median. So that will give you a sense of, okay, we have 11 or so companies out of the proxy group that own nuclear, and the company has, as a percentage of its net generation, slightly higher nuclear generation in 2022. In my rebuttal testimony, I presented a similar chart where I showed you if we included all the proxy companies, including those companies that do not own generation, the company is still, significantly higher than the proxy group average. So when we look at risk assessment, again, because I've developed my analysis relative to the proxy group, and while the proxy group that all the witnesses relied on in this proceeding generally agree are generally comparable in risk. They're not identical in risk, so I still perform, a risk assessment to look at comparatively to the proxy group, what are some additional risk factors that the company may face incremental to the proxy group. And this was one of the risk factors, again, relative to the proxy group.
How big of a deal is it?
I'll let the companies that has to operate the nuclear generation facilities speak to the challenges of that. I think from an investor's perspective, they recognize that it is a unique and incremental risk. When investors look at the overall risk of a company, they look at all the factors. So it's a consideration, and there'll be other factors that may offset some of that risk and other factors that may add to that risk. Again, we're looking at the total risk of the company, which is the business and operating risk of which nuclear generation would be, and then the financial risk of the company.
And I'm asking from that perspective, how much did those calculations impact your ultimate result generally?
That's a good question. Thank you. I'll clarify. I did discuss some of these incremental risks, but my recommendation does not make an explicit adjustment for that risk. So I focused on the midpoint of my range, the average. If you look at all the model results, I focused on the average of those results. So again, although I've identified these additional risk factors, it did not come into play in terms of where I develop my ultimate ROE recommendation in this proceeding.
Thank you for that clarification. And Mr. Phipps, my question for you, I already began to ask, and I guess I'm just looking back at the settlement agreement from 2000 and 2020 and 21.
Yes, ma'am.
And then today, and kind of comparing and contrasting and thinking about how did you operate with the approved allowable ROE of 9.5 versus what you're asking for in this settlement of 9.94. And could you just illuminate a little bit more why there is a higher ROE is the benefits of it, why you couldn't, another way to ask it more negatively is why you couldn't continue to operate with the 9.5 ROE. Does that make enough sense?
It does. And, if I could backtrack to a question you asked Mr. Kassam, it was the increase approved last time was about $60 million, and you're asking for the 219 currently, 219.5. And my response there would be that each individual rate case, you are taking a full account of your books and records at that time to come up with an overall revenue requirement. And that revenue requirement can, create a change to the 60 or the 219, but it's an overall revenue requirement for where you are at that point in time. So given the significant investment that we've put into the system over the last 3 years, 9 months, test period to test period, that's the predominant driver of that increase. And I can assure you, and we've worked very collaboratively with the interveners sitting behind me to come to this settlement. I think everybody's been through the books and records quite in a quite detailed fashion. To your point on the 9.94% ROE, when I take the settlement as a whole, as a package, and that includes the ROE, the capital structure, some terms that I might not personally agree with, and I know that there's terms in there that interveners may not agree with. But taken as a whole, it produces that revenue requirement of 219.5, and I think that's critical for us to maintain our financial standing at this point. We were approved a 9.5% ROE in the last proceeding. Within the first 12 months, we were already in the low 8% earned range. And then when we were allowed to come in, the July 2023 was the end of our 2-year stay out provision. We were earning 5.35%. So to be honest, we sorely could have used the rate increase then, but we knew that customers were dealing with deferred fuel costs, and we decided as a company that we could stomach an extra duration before we did come in for this proceeding, knowing that it was our thought process that fuel would abate, and it has. So now as we stand here before you today, we filed the 4.32% ROE as of the test period. There's a quarterly report, which is even more recent than that, and it's fallen to 4.2%. What I would say there is the 10-year U.S. Treasury rate right now is about 4.25%. So you could think that our shareholders or equity investment right now on a risked basis is making less than the risk-free rate of a federal government bond. And so all that to say, that's why we require this increase, and have worked hard with the interveners to find a fair solution that balances debt holders, shareholders, as well as customers.
If I could just add on to what Mr. Phibbs was saying is, we look at 2021 and the market environment in that time, and we think about the return in terms of, in the context of the overall revenue requirement. The return is a component of the revenue requirement. It is a cost that the company faces, and the company has to pay its investors, and the return that the cost of that return has gone up since 2021. And I think that analyses put forth by all of the interveners have shown that cost has gone up, and they recommended that the company's authorized ROE be increased from the 9.5%. So I think just looking at the difference in the market environments and how capital costs have increased since 2021, I think continues to support the stipulated ROE.
Thank you both for adding all of that to the record. I appreciate it. No further questions.
Thank you.
Anything further? Appears not. This may be a good point to take a lunch break. We got a ways to go, but I would hope maybe an hour would be sufficient if we could come back at 1:45. We're in recess.